Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last live broadcast of Heart Month 2025. I'm Lisa Salberg. I'm the founder and CEO of the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association, and today we are bringing you something quite exciting at the wrap of Heart Month, the launch or relaunch of a new program to the HCMA Recognized Center of Excellence family, Johns Hopkins Medical. And we are welcoming Jose Madrazo and Richard Carrick, the program directors and associate directors, not only to our HCM Center of Excellence community, but we're here to introduce them to you so you understand what has been rebuilt at Johns Hopkins after the departure of Doctors Abrahams, which is Ted Abraham and Roselle Abraham. And we are here today with the new team who has really done a great job at reorganizing and getting this program up and running. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It's an honor to be here on this special day.
Definitely excited to have you. And I hear that the photo that you chose for your slide was taken on HCM Awareness Day. Jose, we're going to start with you. Let our listeners and our viewers know how you got involved in cardiology and what about HCM caught your interest?
Absolutely. Cardiology always interested me since medical school, and I found the heart to be a very fascinating organ. Like it moves, it pumps, and it's got a lot of components to, taking care of people's heart. There's electricity, there's the pump function, there's valves, and so on. So just the anatomy and physiology of the heart was appealing to me. Within cardiology, really fell in love with echocardiography, which is using ultrasound to look at the heart and how it moves and how things work. And we get both anatomy and physiologic information from echocardiography. As an echocardiographer and cardiologist, HCM, of course, is quite a fascinating condition because you really have to use that echo knowledge to look at that anatomy, the interaction of the valves, the filling of the heart, how thick things are and where they are to really individualize care for an HCM patient. So it was a natural fit for me because it's interesting, it's challenging. I enjoy the patient population, and of course it then touches on all these subspecialties that cardiology has and that I can work with.
Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to cardiology and HCM?
I am originally up from Boston, kind of came to cardiology through the research side of things, actually, rather than on the clinical pathway. So I did my PhD up at the University of Vermont in electrophysiology, then trained with Ethan Rowan and Marty Marin and Barry Marin down at Tufts when they were still there, and kind of got connected up to the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy world in that way. And so really started via the research pathway, and that there are a lot of questions that still need to be answered. The kind of skill set that I bring to the table, which is really kind of data analysis, big data and statistical approaches to these things, fit very well with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And then since joining Dr. Madrazo here at Hopkins, have really figured out that not only do I love the research side of it, but the clinical side is really enjoyable as well. And I really value my time in clinic just as much as I value the time on the doing research, trying to answer questions in HCM as well. So it's really been a dream pairing for me, and really thrilled to be now at the footsteps of the future here with the announcement of Hopkins joining the HCMA again.
So we're super excited about having you back on the team, and I can just imagine Barry's probably a little bit happy about this too, as he has long-term ties to Hopkins from his early career, and I'm sure that those stories have not been lost on you. Probably heard a few of them.
Yes.
I bet you did. I wanted to take a moment, and I talked to the guys before we started here, that I think it's really important to take a moment to really just respect the history of Johns Hopkins and cardiology. And it's the last day of Heart Month, and it's the last day of Black History Month. One of the people I admire most in cardiac history isn't a physician. It was a technician named Vivian Thomas who worked with Dr. Blaylock back in the 50s when the first open hearts were being done on children with ASDs. And the movie Something the Lord Made is one of my favorite movies. And it's just got this amazing history of Hopkins being at the forefront of cardiac research and care. And I love that part of Hopkins history. And then I know that Dr. Morrow's original myectomy tools are housed at Hopkins, and I'm going to get my hands on those again for some photo shoots someday. So there's this amazing history of the institution, and now we have the opportunity to shepherd the HCM program into the next generation and the next day. And you guys are the next generation to take it to the next level. So, Jose, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about the rest of the team? And Rick, just let's be casual here. Let's jump in and tell us all about the team and how you plan on functioning.
It is quite an interesting place to be in at Hopkins, and you feel that thick culture and history just walking down the halls and seeing things. We do have Dr. Morrow's tools. Dr. Duke Cameron has them in his possession, which he was nice enough to hold on to them. He's happy to share them. We have a true multidisciplinary team, and we're set up in a hub and spoke model. The main operations are in the main hospital in Baltimore. That's where we have the hospital, all the inpatient things happen there. We also have outpatient visits and testing, imaging there, etc. We have identified members in all the major aspects of HCM care that we have very clear referral patterns established. Additionally to in Baltimore, I see patients a little bit towards the south, getting closer to the DC area in a town called, or a city called Columbia, Maryland, which is in between DC and Baltimore. So a lot of patients prefer that clinic, which is a little bit outside of the hustle bustle of Baltimore. That's more of an outpatient center with echocardiography capacity as well. We have designated members, a very close working relationship with genetics and genetics counselors. So a very robust presence there, which we encourage all our patients to get genetic testing and participate in that. We have several electrophysiologists that we work with that both work on arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation and ventricular arrhythmias, as well as are very well versed in the subtleties of risk stratification in some cases that are a little bit less transparent. We have a very close working relationship with them for shared decision-making discussions as well. We have interventionalists who help with any type of catheterization procedures, hemodynamics, and we're able to do alcohol septal ablations through them, as well as ties with cardiac surgery. Dr. Jim Gammy is the head of our cardiac surgery division. He's experienced in myectomies, and he's a world-class mitral valve surgeon.
Yeah, Gammy's kind of known for a little bit of mitral valve work in his career.
Little
right?
bit, yeah.
Just a little bit.
Well established there. So then beyond that, we have several advanced heart failure providers who we also collaborate with in patients that may be having end stage with preserved ejection fraction HCM, but with advanced kind of diastolic dysfunction type of phenotype. We also get them involved. And so that's kind of the main network of the clinical side. We have providers in pediatrics too as well for screening younger family members as well. And again, the majority of the initial referrals come through myself and Rick from us after we've done the appropriate testing. We also handle a busy mavacamten clinic, which has really taken off, and we're at over 100 patients on mavacamten right now. I forget the last number. It's probably close to 120 or so. And then, all the patients do get enrolled into a research registry, which we keep, which is then kind of our launching pad for, answering some clinical research questions as well. And Dr. Carrick has joined the team with a strong research background. He's going to be primarily in charge of that process.
Rick, let's talk a little bit about why we need to continue to do research. You spent some time with some of the most prolific researchers in HCM, specifically Barry Marin. Number one, I'm sure you got a little bit of the bug from him because he always looks at things from so many angles. You're like, I didn't see that one coming. Why is it important that we continue good registries and good research in HCM?
HCM has the same issue that a lot of these inherited heart diseases have, is that, yes, it's the most common inherited heart disease, but it's still 1 in 500 people. So it's hard to do these sorts of trials that have only recently started coming out, where it's a true randomized controlled trial. So the best way to answer a lot of the questions that are in these kind of, not just HCM, but a niche aspect of HCM. So for example, people with apical aneurysms, to collect that sort of data, that really has to be a registry-based approach where we're observing kind of what happens to folks, what are the effects of treatments that we give to these people, And not only, is it important for us to maintain a registry here at Hopkins, but to maintain that in sort of a parallel way so that we can continue to collaborate and get larger and larger data sets from kind of all these institutions that are part of the HCMA throughout the country. So it really is not just a one-man show by any means. This is a very collaborative thing that we're trying to do, and it gives us the power through that collaboration to answer questions that we never could have done 20 years ago when each separate center was sort of siloed by themselves.
Do you think that AI or machine learning is going to come into play here? And if so, how? We discussed it a little bit on HCM Awareness Day. I had Harlan Krumholtz from, Yale/editor Jack come talk a little bit about what are we doing with AI? And it's a little scary and some people don't quite fully trust it yet. What are you thinking in database and research and the integration?
It's a $1 million question, really. How is AI being applied right now? And I think the answer is to try and increase diagnosis of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's sort of the primary way that these tools are being utilized. So either looking at people who get an ECG, and does that ECG flag them for having suspicion for HCM, or same thing with an echo. And I think we have to be a little bit careful in the way that we apply those tools, broad strokes, because there are such things as false positive diagnoses that these AI tools tend to generate, especially when you're setting them out to kind of every patient in the world that has an ECG. So my personal belief is that we need to be selective in who we're actually using these AI models to help and to apply where we're applying them to get answers that actually make sense and are more likely to be true. Because I think there's a lot of noise out there in the data if you're not careful.
Couldn't agree more. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll find something positive out of the technology, says the girl that in 1995 said, this internet thing might actually stick around. Maybe we can build an organization using that as the core.
Yeah, no question that it's going to change things for sure. I just hope we do it kind of in a smart way.
I'm kind of an optimist, and my hope is that it will flag people that have features of HCM, whether it be on echoes or ECG, and then hopefully direct them to get, proper confirmatory testing. We'll have less people out there that have HCM and have not been diagnosed and been given erroneous diagnoses.
So you've got a comprehensive team. We've got everything from genetics to transplant, peds, surgery when necessary, referrals for surgery when it's not appropriate to be in-house. So we've got the team all set up again, and we are excited about that. What types of challenges are the people in your catchment area facing right now? You're in the DC circle, kind of. You're a little outside of there. Is there anything specific going on in the community that is unique to Baltimore and HCM?
I think we have kind of a large area that's spread out with a lot of hospitals around us. So, and then people don't love coming into Baltimore if they're not from Baltimore. I think we're trying to create a network where we see patients down south, and we're trying to establish a bigger presence up north for more of our routine visits, assessments, etc., and kind of decentralizing a little bit so that not everything is localized and centralized in Baltimore, in the city. And hopefully that gives patients better access and ability to come in and get to see us. And I think that geography is a little bit tricky, because if we put everything in one spot, and there's a big community down south and another big one up north, we're alienating some of the groups. So we're trying to really leverage that hub and spoke model to improve access to patient care.
One of the things that's a little bit different about Hopkins compared to the centers up in Boston or Mayo Clinic is we have a very racially and ethnically diverse population that we care for here. And I know diversity is sort of on the chopping block these days.
Not
get
here.
Too far into the weeds, but we take a lot of pride in kind of serving HCM patients of all race, creed, whatever here in Baltimore. And not only do we love taking care of them clinically, but it helps us to understand the specific problems or diagnostic associated issues that come in those populations that are a little different than the better studied white patients that are out there. So, we really take a lot of interest in care of those patients as well.
Absolutely. And that's part of why we also maintain a robust presence in Baltimore too, because we recognize that some of the inner city Baltimore patients would have a hard time coming out to the community and seeing us out there. So we're really trying to be present in both geographical areas.
That is a big challenge. And I do hope that we're able to keep the inner city system running as well as the spokes out into the suburbs. I think that is a wonderful model if we can operationalize it and you guys don't get too crazy driving in the cars all the time. So, there's the work-life balance of the physician too. We don't talk about that much publicly, but it's something that we think about at HCMA, that we want these guys to have a nice work life so they stick with us because we need them. So I love the idea of dealing with the urban and the suburban. But I also want to kind of double down on something that Rick said there about diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are not political words. They are realities of living with a chronic illness that is genetic and then crosses the spectrum of humans. And we don't all respond the same. Little humans, big humans, female humans, male humans. Our genetic background does make a difference in how we respond to therapies. I'm fascinated by James Moon's work on echocardiography and coming up with normalization for body mass. And, a 6'7" man is not supposed to have the same size heart as a 4'11" woman, but we use standards for everybody as if we're all equal and we're all the same size. So we need to start personalizing measurement understanding. And I think what James has been doing has been great. This is part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not some kind of concept that is about where you were born or where your grandparents were born. It's about health issues that really do matter. 50% of our population are women, and of them, some will have children and all will go into menopause if they live long enough. We know nothing about how menopause affects a woman's heart in HCM in any kind of reasonable manner. So we need to do more research on these issues so we can understand what the consequences are, positive and negative, of some of these consequences of being human. Sorry, rabbit hole, went down it, had to. But what do you guys think about this issue? Let's talk about it a little bit. Is it important for people?
Yeah, we absolutely agree that it's important. And like Rick was saying, we not only agree, but we take pride in the fact that about a quarter of our HCM registry is non-white, with a big portion of those patients being African American. And, we need to study any differences. We need to study differences and barriers to access and testing and make sure they're getting everything they need, just like everyone else. And then study differences in phenotype and the disease. And we actually have a few projects going on looking at those things. Specifically, Rick is looking at our MRI data, and we're trying to then break that down by race and see if there's equal access to MRI based on race. And if not, if we can identify some of those barriers. And then looking at the actual MRI data, whether the phenotypes are any different or not as well, in terms of degree of hypertrophy, patterns of hypertrophy, presence of scar, etc. So I think there's a lot to be done there. We think it's very important. And then again, on the clinical side, I want all my patients to get the care they need, regardless of their racial or socioeconomic status. So we make big efforts to do that.
Thank you. That's very well covered. We do have a couple of questions that have popped in because we're live and people can ask us things. And I will answer the one for Cindy. Is there an HCMA in Texas? Well, we are an international organization, so we serve everybody. We do have a number of centers of excellence in the state of Texas, and Sabrina has been kind enough to drop a link to our full Center of Excellence directory, so thank you, Sabrina. And you can find the centers that we have in Texas there. Now, Cindy's other question I'm going to send over to our physicians. What causes HCM patients to go from non-obstructed to obstructed?
It's an interesting question that may have many facets to it. I mean, when we talk about obstruction, we're talking about when the heart pumps, whether the blood can get out freely, or is there any barrier to it coming out with pressure building up in the heart. Most of the time, we're referring specifically to obstruction in the outflow tract or at the base of the heart. And when we look at HCM, we see that a third of patients clearly have obstruction right off the bat. You can hear a murmur, you can see it on the echocardiogram and so on. And about 2/3 of patients don't show obstruction at baseline. But if we take those patients and we put them on a treadmill and we do provocative maneuvers, half of those will then show that they do have the capacity to obstruct, or what we call labile obstructive patients. So some patients may not obstruct at baseline, but then when we dig in further, we'll find that they are able to obstruct, and then may reclassify them from non-obstructive to obstructive. Or in other cases, there may be changes in hemodynamics, meaning this obstruction is not a fixed problem, but it'll get worse with certain conditions like dehydration, or if your heart rate goes up, if you're nervous, if you're agitated, if you're exercising. So if an echocardiogram was done at different times and one shows obstruction and one doesn't, it may be that some of these other things had varied. And, again, some HCM patients have triggers like large meals or different weather patterns. So any of these things could explain why there may have been obstruction in one echo versus the other. And then lastly, there can be actual disease changes. So the amount of thickening in the heart happens. We don't know exactly why or when. We think a lot of it may happen during puberty and growth, but that's not always the case. Most patients thicken and then kind of level off, but there's patients that develop thickening later in life. So there may have been a change in the anatomy that happened over time as well. So hopefully that covers the gist of the question.
I always add in the fact that age beats up the mitral valve, and as the mitral valve becomes a little less compliant, you get a little bit floppier, and that ability to create SAM seems to happen a little easier in midlife, which might be why that's when a lot of people get diagnosed at around 40. And
Yep.
You didn't do anything wrong, you just were aging with HCM, and at some point you obstruct. So you're welcome, Cindy. I hope that was a really good answer, Cindy. You don't get that kind of an answer like just off the cuff. You gotta go to the specialist for that one. Okay, so we have an interesting question coming in here from Jordan in the Middle East. And Ruby, your ChatGPT cannot analyze your EKG. Rick, you want to just comment on that part before I go into this next part? Can ChatGPT analyze somebody's electrocardiogram?
No. So I mean, it's an interesting question. I think the underlying thing here is that not all AI is the same. So ChatGPT is sort of a language model, and you can ask it questions to help you explain things. So it's great for, if you're a patient and you've got a question about some aspect of your HCM diagnosis, ChatGPT can give a quick answer. You probably want to run it by a professional as well, just to make sure everything's accurate, but it's not a bad starting place. The types of AI algorithms that are used to diagnose HCM, those are specifically designed to take an input like an EKG to make a diagnosis. So they're slightly different. They're both AI, but they're different branches of AI.
So Ruby's other question has to do with, and I'm going to take this as an educational moment. Ruby's referring to, I'm assuming she, but it could be a he with that name, I'm not sure, referring to having a rare condition called apical hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Gentlemen, is apical HCM rare, or does it just have a reputation as being rare?
I don't think it's that rare. We have a fair number of patients. I think, Rick, do you have specifics on that?
I can get them in about 20 seconds. But you keep talking, and by the time you're done,
I'll keep chatting while you look. So the other thing I'll say with that one too is I have a fairly large number of patients that have apical HCM and come see me and say they've known about it for a long time, but their doctors were just unimpressed or thought that was kind of a benign variant that didn't really merit much attention and didn't need much follow-up. So part of it may also be a referral bias there.
Yeah, so we have about 15% of the patients in our registry are apical variant HCM. And, part of that is less common than the typical forms of HCM, but it's probably also less diagnosed, because those sorts of folks that have apical HCM tend to have less obstruction just because of where the thickness in the heart is happening. So they don't get the symptoms that come with obstruction. And so unless you happen to follow into a doctor's office, again, an EKG that shows these kind of typical changes that would be associated with apical HCM, you could, live 30 years without knowing that you had the diagnosis in the background. So that's one of the ways that these kind of AI tools, not to keep bringing it back to the same thing again.
And talking about individualized or personalized medicine as well, this is one of the areas where we're really looking into whether our criteria to diagnose HCM are adequate for apical HCM. We know that the heart should taper and become thinner towards the apex. And so in patients that don't taper and have thicker segments in the apex, we may diagnose them with apical HCM, even if they don't meet the traditional criteria of 15 millimeters in terms of wall thickness, particularly if they have abnormal ECGs and things like that.
The other thing I will bring up about apical HCM, which funny, not funny story, our original posters for HCMA had a picture of a normal heart, an obstructed heart, and a non-obstructed heart. Patients would say to me, well, I'm rare, I'm not on the poster. So we made a new poster, and the new poster has mid-cavity and apical because they are all forms of HCM. Where your hypertrophy is the second part of it. It's like being a little bit pregnant, like you got it, but like, is it a boy, is it a girl, is it big, is it small? We have differences. The other thing I will say about our apical population, it's really important to get good follow-up because apical aneurysms can form, and apical aneurysms can be very dangerous. They're very rare. But when they occur, it can be a problem, and it can be a nidus point for an arrhythmia, and it needs to be taken care of carefully. Now, to get to Ruby's other challenge, Ruby is located in the Middle East. There are not a lot of centers of excellence in the Middle East, although we do have some connections with individual providers in that region. So Ruby, I'm going to ask you to kind of take this off of social media, contact our office. You can email us. If one of my staff could write in the support@4hcm.org email so we can put it up on the screen, that would be really helpful in the next few minutes. But you can email us. We can set up a Zoom call. We can go through an intake and navigation process with you and hopefully help you identify some care providers that are a little more convenient or to whom can provide you a virtual consult opportunity as well. Don't worry, we got you covered no matter where you literally are on this earth. We have some connections and resources, and if we don't have them currently, we will make them.
Johns Hopkins has an international office, so if they reach out to Johns Hopkins International, we do get some referrals in that way, and they help patients make their way and come in and see us. We've seen patients from the Middle East, I remember a couple from Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia that have come in, done their visits, got some testing, got recommendations, and gone back home.
Fantastic. We've also got this comment that came in. Thought you'd appreciate that. And a follow-up question from that individual. Can you fluctuate between obstructed and non-obstructed?
Yeah, so I think I alluded to that a little bit earlier in that some patients, so obstruction is not a fixed problem. So I always tell that to my patients. And if you see your gradient or the number on the echo go up and down between tests, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing better or worse or that your disease has progressed or regressed. So just think of that as a dynamic number. And so with that comes the fact that some patients will have echoes where they were well hydrated, they were at rest, beta blocked, and so on, and may not have much of a gradient, versus other echoes that they may be dehydrated, they were rushing, they're tachycardic, forgot their medicine, or that it's done with more provocation, things like a more vigorous Valsalva maneuver or a goal-directed Valsalva, or they do an exercise test.
We're going to unpack some of that. What is a targeted Valsalva?
So Valsalva is when we bear down, we push, and you maybe see your veins pop out. You can get dizzy while you do that. What that does is it decreases the amount of blood flow making its way into your heart, and therefore the heart cavity can get smaller while you're doing that. And when the heart's smaller, that distance between the mitral valve and the septum becomes smaller and you obstruct more. So it's a way we bring out the obstruction by the patient doing a maneuver. A goal-directed Valsalva is, let me see if this shows up. We take a little manometer like that and we plug it into some tubing, and you stick the tubing in your mouth and you blow and you make this needle go up to a specific number, and you hold it there for a certain duration, painting that picture. And the data has shown that a goal-directed Valsalva will be more likely to bring out obstruction than a regular Valsalva maneuver. So these are some tricks to try and really look into whether there is obstruction in there.
Sorry to make you dive down that rabbit hole, but I think it's important. I've recently heard from some patients around the country that when they're having their REMS echoes, that some of the technicians are not having them do Valsalva the same way. So they're wondering whether their gradient is really improving as much because there's so much variability in how they're doing their Valsalva. So I would encourage you all, I've done a fair share of Valsalva echoes in my life pre-transplant, to try to be consistent, not only about how you're bearing down and how long and how hard. I love using the monitor to check how much pressure you're using, but to also make sure you are not studying for the tests. Don't be your best you the day you go to the doctor, be your average you, because that's what you're going to be at home. And it doesn't do anybody any good when you show up at the doctor's office perfectly rested, perfectly hydrated, perfectly fed, perfectly rested, everything's perfect, and that's your perfect day. Be normal. Rush, miss the coffee, miss the water, whatever could happen on a regular day. Be your normal person, because that's going to let them help you the best. If you're going in showing only your best, then they don't have much to work with because they're not seeing you on a bad day. Not sure if I can ask this question. You can ask any question, whether we answer it or not. That's the second question. When do you recommend a myosin inhibitor? So Camzyos is a myosin inhibitor. There will be another one to market probably by September. When is somebody offered a myosin inhibitor?
Great question, and one that may spark some debate. But in general, as of right now, we're using it for patients with obstructions, whether that is at rest or with provocation, with symptoms, and that have typically tried our first-line drugs like a beta blocker and have persistent symptoms. So you need to have obstruction and you need to have symptoms for us to offer you a myosin inhibitor. Who do we not want to use it in? We do not want to use it in patients who have a depressed ejection fraction or low function, or even a borderline ejection fraction, because these medicines will drop that EF slightly, so we want to make sure we have enough buffer to start out with. What are some areas of debate there? Some people advocate that we should be using these as first-line drugs. Some people advocate that we should be trying multiple drugs before we move on to a myosin inhibitor, and that we have a discussion about septal reduction therapies at the same level as a myosin inhibitor. And then there's also ongoing research for what these drugs may do in non-obstructive HCM and whether there's a role in patients without obstruction. So there's a lot more out there to answer, but as of right now, obstructive with symptoms, with a preserved robust ejection fraction.
Dawn's asking, so is a murmur obstruction?
It can be. So a murmur is when we listen to the heart and we hear an abnormal whooshing type of noise that shouldn't be there. Murmurs can happen when there's leaky valves, when there's tight valves, when there's turbulence, when there's obstruction. Assuming there's no other pathology in the heart, that we're only talking about HCM and LVOT obstruction, then typically, yes, a murmur is what we equate with obstruction. And then we have to figure out how severe the obstruction is using echocardiography. But the murmur is a good initial screen to help us and kind of predict whether we're going to see obstruction on the echo. And just like the echo, there may be very little or no murmur at rest, and we can have patients do maneuvers like Valsalva, squatting down, standing up, and we can make that murmur increase or decrease in intensity, as well as having murmurs that are louder or softer at different time points when you come see me in the office, based on things like whether you are hydrated or not, or took your medicines or not.
Add slightly to that, one of the things that's been pretty interesting about mavacamten is we've had people who have had murmurs for, their entire adult lives, and they get started on the medication and ramped up to the right dose for them, and that murmur goes away. And that's because that turbulent blood flow that's being caused by the obstruction is no longer there, and that is what is causing the murmur for people who have obstruction. So it's kind of an interesting benefit. It doesn't really make a difference if you have a murmur or not per se, but that's an interesting finding that we see in the clinic all the time.
I have to laugh because you made me go back in my brain a long time to my diagnosis. So 1980, Paul Goldfinger, shout out to you, living down the shore now, retired. But in his office, he had me squat while listening to my heart. And I thought that was the strangest thing ever. I was 12 years old. What did I know? And just by the squat, he just kind of, I know what I'm going to find. And the echo confirmed that I had a gradient of about 100 when I was 12. I remember his face on the squat. He's like, oh yeah, like he found one, because they're not common to find at that point in time. Thank you, Paul Goldfinger. Miss you. Anyway, we have another question, and we're going to let this one be our last one, but we're going to go out with a little bit of medicine in 2025. Can HCM patients be affected by COVID more severely than a non-HCM patient? And what's the best way patients can protect themselves against COVID?
Oh boy, you're gonna get me into politics here, but so the answer to that, I think, is not a one-size-fits-all answer, which I think is very appropriate for HCM. Not every HCM patient is the same. I think the more severe form, more symptomatic form of HCM that you have, you're going to be at a higher risk to have more severe reactions with a COVID infection versus someone with a milder form of HCM that's asymptomatic and has little or no obstruction. So I think it is a spectrum. And when patients say, I got COVID, do I need to take medicines, et cetera, we do take these things into account: age, comorbidities, severity of their HCM, immunosuppression, et cetera, et cetera. I think the best protection to not get a severe case of COVID remains to be vaccinated and keep up to speed with your vaccines.
Rick, anything to add on that?
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that one of the downsides of mavacamten or Camzyos is that it has a lot of interactions with other medicines, and Paxlovid, which is one of those treatments for COVID, is a strong reaction with Camzyos. So if we have a mavacamten patient who's on, if we have an HCM patient who's on mavacamten, we do ask them to avoid this Paxlovid medication unless, they really are quite sick from COVID, like need to be in the hospital. But so that is one other consideration that we think about when we're taking care of an HCM patient with COVID.
Thank you for doing potpourri questions. You never know what kind of questions you're going to be asked when you're live, and you guys were good sports and you rolled with it. And I hope we have some good information for individuals out there. Ruby, which I have figured out by your picture, is a female. Ruby, please do contact the office at support@4hcm.org. Wherever you are in the world, we're here to help you. So don't hesitate to give us a call, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. And now back to the subject matter at hand. Johns Hopkins is back in the HCMA Recognized Center of Excellence family. We have balloons to celebrate. All right, they might have been HCM Awareness Day, but I will bring the balloons to the front of stage today because you guys are our wrap on Heart Month.
Awesome.
And it's a celebration of all of the things that we are able to do together to keep families whole as long as possible and to truly provide the best level of care we can. So welcome back to Johns Hopkins. Welcome to Rick and Jose, to our community. You'll be seeing them on Big Hearted events. We're going to be live in Baltimore. Oh my goodness, when are we doing this? In the fall?
September, is it 13th, Rick?
13th, yeah.
September 13th, we will be live in Baltimore with an in-person meeting. So we're super excited about that. It'll be listed for registration soon on the website, so stay tuned for updates. And we are so happy to have you back. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And you made it through Heart Month. We made it through this arduous process of getting you back on the list. And we thank you for all you do for our community.
Thank you, Lisa, for everything you do for the HCM community and for welcoming us back. We're really excited to be back. And thank you to everyone at Hopkins that trailblazed and allowed us to be here as well. We're happy to be here.
Thank you all for joining. And on this Rare Disease Day, at the end of Heart Month and a couple days after HCM Awareness Day and wrapping up Black History Month, take a moment and appreciate all of the special people in your life with heart disease from the African American community that have brought advances to our culture. Just take a moment to appreciate in all the chaos that's going on around us, all the advances we're making and all of the things that are possible if we work together. So there is my positive note to leave on. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.
The Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association would like to thank our sponsors, Cytokinetics, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Edgewise Therapeutics.